Hello everyone, my name is Tyranno Imperio. I'm a T-Rex VTuber. For anyone who doesn't know me, it's good to see you here. Hope you are doing well, and welcome to my Dino Fact on Alan Grant and Sam Neill's favorite dinosaur, Triceratops. Triceratops is a ceratopsian from late Cretaceous North America, specifically found in the Hell Creek and Lance formations. And I'm sure by now some of you are probably wondering, does this dinosaur really need an introduction or really a video? After all, it's one of the most popular dinosaurs of all time, showing up in all kinds of movies, TV shows, it's got books, it's got toys, and in real life, Triceratops was one of the largest and most powerful animals in its ecosystem, and it lived alongside Tyrannosaurus rex as often its hard-earned meal or even the slayer of the tyrant lizard king. So, is there really anything else that we need to learn about this specific dinosaur? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. There is still a lot more to be discovered about this amazing creature. Even with all the fame and glory it has, there's still a lot about this dinosaur that not a lot of people are aware of. So that's what I'm going to do with this specific video. Showcase some of the little unknown facts about Triceratops that might have fallen through the cracks. And what better way to start with a large animal than small? Ontogeny is essentially the development of an individual animal from birth to adulthood, and also the study of this process. And for modern animals, most people can tell that there's more visual cues for these animals to showcase when they're young versus when they're adults, outside of just simply being smaller than their adult counterparts. But in the case of dinosaurs, that's not really how they're portrayed in a lot of paleo media, just usually being portrayed as slightly shrunken down versions of the adults with otherwise very similar proportions. Think Bakita from the Jurassic Park Telltale game, Chom from Dinosaur King, or also Sarah, except also Land Before Time probably assumed that the brow horns kinda growing later for some reason, maybe. I don't know what happened with Sarah. But I can understand how some people might think that this is fine since we may not know what a baby Triceratops looks like, so it's best to play it safe. We don't know what a baby Triceratops looks like, right? Well, for a while, specifically since 2006, we actually do have a baby Triceratops fossil. And not just baby Triceratops, but we actually have specimens of Triceratops across multiple different age groups, that we actually have a decent idea of what Triceratops' ontogeny generally looks like. For baby Triceratops, we actually do see that it has all three horns, but they're also proportionally a lot shorter and thinner than their adult counterparts' horns. And when you look noticeably at the frill, you can see that it's curved significantly more backwards and it's a lot more flat than what you'd see in adult specimens, where the frills are instead much more curved upwards. Same thing goes for their horns. As you can see, when they get older, their horns curve upward and usually also curve forward once they reach full maturity. You might have also noticed on the frill that in some Triceratops specimens that are young but not too young, they actually have the little spikes along the edges of the frills that you often see in depictions in movies and such. These are called episcipicals, and while I understand keeping them on adults in fantasy media for the sake of rule of cool, in the real life versions, as you can see in this picture, they actually get more smoothened out over time as they become reabsorbed by the bone of the frill, until eventually when they reach full maturity, the frill is completely smooth and the episcipicals are completely gone. And all of this is to say, I am personally incredibly impressed by just how much we know about the ontogeny of an animal that's 66 million years away from us. All thanks to the hard work of paleontologists working to find specimens of individuals that happen to die in the right time and place to make the fossils we need to figure stuff out like this. And there's still more we need to learn about on the subject, like, are there Triceratops embryos out there that we can find, and is there direct evidence of Triceratops showing parental care? In any case, It's time to start our next segment, I do believe, and I think I'll start it off with an interesting, yet confusing question. What do you think these two Triceratops will look like as adults? You're probably thinking, like an adult Triceratops, right? We know what they look like, don't we? And before anyone thinks their childhood's about to be ruined, no, Triceratops, we do know what it looks like as an adult. But the issue is, there isn't just a Triceratops, because there isn't just one. Time for a lesson on taxonomy, specifically on binomial nomenclature. Basically, the system that gives animals their scientific name, consisting of genus and species. Because with a lot of paleomedia, they don't do it quite right. Oftentimes, the names used to describe a species within paleomedia is actually their genus name, like Velociraptor, Tyrannosaurus, etc., etc. And I do think it's important to know this information because, from a casual perspective, that means instead of just having one of your favorite extinct animal, you can have multiple variations of them. Granted, most genera only have one species usually because with just fossils alone, it's usually pretty difficult to identify new species, but it's still possible. And also, it's just important to recognize that a lot of dinosaurs that you know are genera rather than just species, as it gives you an idea of just how much more diverse prehistoric ecosystems could have been. I'll use their fellow Archosaurs crocodilians as an example. Within the Crocodylus genus, there are 13 known living species today, all of which have their own unique appearances and behaviors, depending on where and how they live. And there's no telling how diverse certain dinosaur genera may have been as well. So now going back to Triceratops, we have two species, Triceratops horridus and Triceratops porosus. That we know of, since some species might be discovered later. So what's the difference between these two? Horridus has a shallower snout, T. porosus has a overall more noticeable nasal horn, and T. horridus is overall larger, though mostly they overlap in size. The largest T. horridus specimen we have is Big John over here, who clocks in around 3 meters tall, 8 meters long, and stands at a whopping 12 to 14 tons in weight, with some estimates putting it at 16, though I kinda doubt it. And more recently, we found a very impressively large T. porosus specimen named Willard, who clocks in at around 3.5 meters tall and 8.5 meters long, which is already larger in those measurements than Big John, and for its weight is 10 to 11 tons. Still impressive, but surprisingly lower than Big John's. Perhaps there could have been an issue with my research, or maybe an issue with the estimation methods, or perhaps similar to T-Rex, maybe T. horridus could make up for height and length by just being jacked. But then on to the most questionable way of differentiating the two species through the length and shape of their brow horns. And the reason why I find this to be questionable is because, for one thing, as I mentioned before, Triceratops' brow horns changed a lot as it grew up, and thanks to other ceratopsians like Hannah the Styracosaurus, we know that head ornamentation for ceratopsians could have been susceptible to a lot of individual variation, which would make it very unhelpful for determining between two species. But there is also one really big difference that can't really be messed up, and that is time. Thanks to the rock layers that these two species were found in, we know for a fact that they didn't live at the same time and were separated by a few million years, with T. horridus having lived around 69 to 67 million years ago, while T. porosus lived around 66 million years ago. And it's actually speculated that T. horridus might have directly evolved into T. porosus. And if this theory is true, it is without a doubt awesome to find a transition between two species like this. But overall, Triceratops had two awesome species that we currently know of, and if you feel sad that the two would have never met in real life, it's okay, because Triceratops as a genus was not alone either. Living right alongside Triceratops in Hell Creek was Torosaurus, a fellow large ceratopsian that measured at around 7.5 to 9 meters long, 8 tons in weight, and had the largest skull of any known land animal at around 3 meters long almost. Though it may not be quite as famous as his cousin, you might have already heard of this specific ceratopsian thanks to an old theory way back when that it might have been an older growth stage of Triceratops. And while I would normally bash the paleontologists involved with this theory, I'm not gonna do that. I don't think this is the right video for that. But essentially, it's been outdated for a multitude of reasons. The main ones are that we have large mature Triceratops specimens like Big John and Willard, who are definitely not Torosaurus specimens. And in recent years, we found juvenile and subadult Torosaurus specimens like YPM1831, which we have found are definitely not Triceratops specimens, which kind of serves as the smoking gun for this debate. So the truth is a lot cooler in my opinion. Instead of the two being just growth stages of one another, we definitively have two large ceratopsians coexisting in the same habitat. And I love it because it means we get to imagine how these two might have interacted within the same habitat in the same way that a lot of megafauna that live today that are related to each other might have to interact in the same environments, like members of the rhino family and members of the deer family. But even with this, we are still not done because Triceratops and Torosaurus were also not alone. Enter Leptoceratops, who, unlike its other compatriots, it was a much smaller ceratopsian at only around 2 meters long and 100 kilograms in weight. Now, it may have been a while, but if you recall from my Zoochang Tyrannus video, you might remember how I mentioned the Ceratopsidae group within ceratopsians, which includes essentially all the big guys with frills and horns. Well, definitely Leptoceratops did not quite fit into that category. Instead, it has a lot of traits reminiscent of primitive ceratopsians, like one of the first ceratopsians to be found in North America, Aquilops, and a fellow late Cretaceous ceratopsian, Protoceratops, which also retained a lot of traits from their primitive ancestors. And this is in spite of the fact that they lived around the same time as more advanced ceratopsians. So that begs the question of, why don't they look more like their other relatives? And that question can be answered to an extent by divergent evolution, though not exactly quite like how it's described here. Essentially what I'm getting at is that even though large ceratopsians like Triceratops had a good niche going for them, Leptoceratops also had a good niche of its own still. Often small herbivores are not quite as appealing to the eye as large herbivores, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still an important niche, and small ceratopsians like Leptosaurus and Protoceratops demonstrate that even in the late Cretaceous, this build is still perfectly sufficient to fulfill this particular niche, though nothing needs to be changed really. And remember Aquilops from earlier? It appeared in the early Cretaceous period, around 107 million years ago, meaning between it and Leptoceratops, there was 40 million years for all kinds of things to potentially happen. So while other North American ceratopsians were getting themselves frills and horns, Leptoceratops found a way to keep its primitive build and then come across its relatives later on. So overall, Triceratops lived alongside two pretty interesting close relatives as three of the last ceratopsians to ever exist. As remember I mentioned that T. Pororsis lived 66 million years ago. Most of you know what that means. Triceratops pororsis would have lived right at the time of the KT extinction event and would have witnessed the end of all non-avian dinosaurs and the Mesozoic era. Cut to 1888, when a very interesting skull with 3 horns, one on its nose, two around his eyebrows, was discovered and named Triceratops. And then this little fossil would go on to represent a dinosaur that would become a pop culture icon. Toy after toy, book after book, TV show after TV show, and movie after movie. Especially one particular movie in 1993 that not only became a milestone in paleomedia, a box office hit that inspired a huge movie franchise. It helped to spark a massive fascination and love for dinosaurs for millions everywhere, and brought life to quite a few paleontologists. And alongside Triceratops, one of the people that helped to make this happen was actor Sam Neill, who, like his prehistoric co-star, was a major part of lots of our childhoods and left behind a legacy that will never be forgotten. Thank you so very much for watching, and for Sam Neill, thank you for all the wonderful memories.